She said I couldn't stay the night, but neither of us was ready to say goodbye. It was one of those evenings where the rain felt endless, not heavy enough to flood the streets, but steady, persistent, clinging to the air like a second skin. I climbed the narrow stairwell of my apartment building, shoulders damp from the drizzle, my bag heavy from a late night at work. The lights along the corridor flickered faintly, the old wiring protesting against the weather. And there she was. Mrs. Hale, my landlady. She stood by her doorway with a steaming mug in hand, warm light spilling behind her, framing her in a soft, golden glow that made the rest of the hall look even colder. She was dressed simply, a light gray cardigan draped over a fitted blouse, dark jeans that made her look effortlessly put together, the kind of elegance that didn't shout for attention but drew your eyes all the same. Her hair, chestnut brown with hints of silver near the temples, was tied loosely, a few strands escaping and brushing the side of her neck. The rain had touched them too, they clung slightly to her skin. "You're late," she said, her voice low and even, not accusing, just observant. That was her way. She noticed things. I adjusted the strap of my bag and managed a tired smile. Work dragged on. Sorry if I made any noise coming in. She sipped her tea, her gaze lingering on me just a second too long before shifting toward the stairwell. No noise. Just. She hesitated, as though she wasn't sure if she should continue. I should remind you, no overnight stays. It's in the agreement. I blinked, caught off guard. Overnight stays? Her lips curved faintly, almost apologetic. Guests. Friends. You know, company. This building's old, the walls are thin. I like to keep it quiet. The way she said it wasn't cold, but there was a firmness beneath the softness, like a line she drew not out of pettiness, but out of habit, out of caution. I nodded slowly, even though I'd never planned on bringing anyone over. Of course. I understand. She shifted her mug to the other hand, her fingers brushing the sleeve of her cardigan as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It's not that I mind, it just makes things simpler for everyone. The rain drummed faintly on the window at the end of the hall. I noticed then how the light from her apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and wood polish, warm, domestic, safe. A stark contrast to my own place just down the hall, quiet and dim, always smelling faintly of damp plaster. I'll keep it in mind, I said finally. She gave a small nod, the conversation already fading from her expression as she turned the doorknob. But just before she stepped in, she glanced back, a subtle look in her eyes that felt like both a warning and something else, something unspoken. A kind of guardedness I couldn't name yet. Then the door closed with a soft click, and the hallway felt colder without her there. The next evening, the rain had eased but left behind a damp chill that clung to the stairwell. I was just turning the key in my door when I heard a soft, uneven thud below, the sound of a paper bag brushing the wall. Mrs. Hale was halfway up the stairs, her arms full of groceries, a thin plastic bag hooked on one wrist and a heavier paper one in her grip. She looked up, a little breathless but still carrying that calm, composed air she always had. "Evening," she said, offering a polite smile that didn't quite mask the strain in her arms. "Let me help you with those," I said, already moving down a step. "Oh, I've got it," she began, but the paper bag slipped slightly, and a few bright oranges rolled against the stairs, bumping softly before coming to rest near my feet. I crouched to catch one, the cool skin pressing against my palm. "Looks like they disagree," I said with a small laugh. Her lips parted, the hint of a chuckle escaping her before she exhaled, a trace of relief softening her face. "All right, thank you." I gathered the rest of the groceries, careful not to crush the delicate paper bag, and followed her up. The faint scent of citrus rose between us, mixed with something floral that clung lightly to her cardigan. Not perfume, exactly, but the kind of scent that lingers when someone has been out in the cool evening air. Her keys jingled as she unlocked her door, the warm light spilling out just as it had the night before. I hesitated for a moment, still holding one of the heavier bags as she stepped inside. "You can just leave it by the counter," she said, gesturing to a small table inside her hallway. For a heartbeat, I stood at the threshold. Her home was quiet, lived in but not cluttered. A single framed photograph on the wall, her in a wide-brimmed hat, standing near a coastline. There was a faint sound of a kettle humming somewhere deeper in the apartment. I stepped in just enough to set the bag down. Our hands brushed over the handle as she reached for it, warm against cool, the touch fleeting but enough to make her pause. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at me. I nodded, unsure why my chest felt suddenly tight. "Any time." For a second, her eyes lingered, a curious, unreadable look that made me wonder if she wanted to say something more. But then she stepped back, smoothing her hair with one hand, her usual composure settling back in place. "You should get inside," she murmured, almost as if reminding herself as much as me. "Good night, Mrs. Hale," I said. "Good night," she replied, her voice a touch quieter this time. The door closed gently, leaving me in the dim hallway with the faint scent of oranges still clinging to my fingers. It was just after 9 when I heard the soft knock on my door. 2 quick taps, almost hesitant. I set my mug down and opened it to find Mrs. Hale standing there, her cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders, sleeves pushed up just enough to reveal her wrists. There was a faint crease of concern between her brows, and in her hand she held a small flashlight. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice carrying that quiet calm I was beginning to associate with her. "The kitchen light's been flickering all evening. I've tried everything, but it won't stay on. I was wondering if you might take a look." I blinked at her for a moment, surprised more by the invitation than the request. "Of course," I said, grabbing my small tool kit from the shelf. "Let's see what we can do." Her kitchen was warm and softly lit by the glow of a lamp on the counter, casting gentle shadows over the tiled floor. The faint aroma of chamomile tea hung in the air, mingling with the subtle scent of something lemony, dish soap, perhaps. The table was set with a single cup, steam still curling from its rim. "Sorry about the mess," she murmured, though there wasn't much of one, just an open book and a folded dish towel. "It's that fixture above the counter. It flickers whenever I try to cook." I stepped onto the small stepladder she'd already placed beneath it, reaching up to twist the bulb free. As I did, I felt her presence behind me, close enough that I caught the warmth of her sleeve brushing my calf as she steadied the ladder with one hand. Her fingers curled lightly around my ankle, just to keep the step from wobbling. "Careful," she said softly, and the word carried more warmth than warning. I glanced down briefly. Her eyes were lifted toward me, calm but watchful. For a moment it felt like a fragile sort of trust, the kind that's given quietly, without ceremony. "There we go," I murmured, securing the new bulb into place. The light blinked once, then steadied, flooding the kitchen in soft yellow glow. She let go of the ladder slowly, her hand lingering a heartbeat longer than needed. "You've saved me from another evening of cooking in the dark," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting in a small smile. "It's no trouble," I replied, stepping down. "I'm just glad it wasn't the wiring." Her fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a faint mark where the steam from her tea had dampened it. "Would you like a cup?" she asked, almost as an afterthought, but her tone had softened. I almost said yes, but something in her eyes, that slight hesitation, the way her thumb traced the rim of her cup, made me think this was already enough for one night. "Maybe next time," I said gently. She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. "Thank you again," she murmured. As I stepped back into the hall, I found myself wondering how something as small as a flickering light could leave the air between two people feeling just a little warmer. The storm rolled in without warning, a low growl that turned quickly into a restless roar. By midnight, rain was streaming down the windows like silver threads, the wind pushing against the old frame of the building. I sat in the dim glow of my phone screen, the faint hum of the radiator the only sound keeping the night company. Then came a knock, soft, hesitant, but cutting through the storm's noise. When I opened the door, there she was. Mrs. Hale stood in the hallway, a flashlight in hand, rain still glistening in her hair and on the shoulders of her cardigan. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath carried a slight shiver as she spoke. power's out again," she said, glancing toward the darkened stairwell. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." I nodded, setting my phone aside. "I'm fine. You shouldn't be out in this, though." A flicker of a smile crossed her face, faint, almost self-conscious. "Neither should you, I suppose?" The hall lights were dead, leaving only her flashlight to trace the outlines of our steps. The air smelled of wet pavement and faint electricity, like the sky itself had split open. "You can wait in here if you'd like," I offered. "At least until it settles a bit." She hesitated at the threshold, her fingers tightening slightly on the flashlight. There was that same carefulness I'd seen in her before, the part of her that measured every step, every choice. But then a strong gust rattled the windows at the end of the hall, and she exhaled, quietly conceding. "Just for a moment," she murmured, stepping inside. The room felt smaller with her there, not cramped, but warmer somehow, the faint scent of her rain-damp cardigan mingling with the dry air. She placed the flashlight on the table, its beam casting a soft halo across the wall. "You really should get a storm kit," she said lightly, glancing around. "I keep meaning to," I admitted, running a hand through my damp hair. "But nights like this are rare." For a few moments the storm spoke for us, the steady drumming of rain, the distant crackle of thunder. She moved closer to the window, watching the streets below disappear beneath the slick reflections of street lamps. "It's strange," she said quietly. "Nights like this make the building feel smaller. Like the world outside stops existing for a while." I stood beside her, close enough to feel the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm. The window pane trembled under another gust, and without thinking, I reached to steady it. Our hands almost touched on the cold frame. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to mine, a brief, searching glance, then back to the storm. "I shouldn't stay long," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction this time. "Then don't go just yet," I replied, a half-smile tugging at my lips. The silence that followed was warm, stretched thin between thunderclaps, a silence that felt like it was waiting for something neither of us was quite ready to name. The power didn't return that night. We found a few candles between us, one from her kitchen drawer, another from the back of my cupboard, their soft flames flickering like small islands of warmth in the quiet. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm, the rain now a hushed curtain against the glass. She sat on the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, cardigan wrapped a little tighter around her shoulders. I settled a short distance away, the blanket I'd offered draped loosely over her lap and brushing against my knee. "It's been a while since I've done this," she said, watching the flames sway. "Sat in the dark like this, listening to the weather. When I was a girl, storms felt like an excuse to slow down, to talk, to wait them out. Now they just feel like interruptions." I smiled faintly, turning my mug between my hands. "Maybe they're still the same. We're just not as used to slowing down anymore." She glanced at me, a look that lingered a beat too long, as though weighing something in the air between us. The conversation wandered after that. She spoke of her work at the gallery, the quiet satisfaction of seeing people stand in front of a painting and forget the world for a moment. I told her about my job, the long hours, the half-finished plans I kept meaning to pick up again. There was no rush in our words. The storm outside gave us permission to speak slowly, to listen. At one point, her laughter, low and quiet, slipped into the room. It caught me off guard, how warm it sounded, how it seemed to reach past the polite lines we'd both kept until now. "Sorry," she murmured, her hand brushing mine as she steadied her cup on the table. The touch was brief, but it lingered, the kind of touch that feels like it belongs there, even when it's gone. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. For a while, we just sat like that, her hand resting lightly over mine, the candlelight painting her profile in soft gold. There was a stillness in her expression, a quiet vulnerability beneath the poise. "I wasn't expecting company tonight," she said at last, almost to herself. "I wasn't either," I replied. She gave a faint smile, the kind that comes when words run out but something else remains. Then, slowly, she eased her hand back, tucking it into her sleeve. The storm grumbled in the distance, softer now. The building felt smaller again, not from the weather, but from the closeness that had settled in. "Thank you," she said gently, her eyes on the flickering flame, "for not making this feel strange." I wanted to tell her it didn't feel strange at all, that it felt right, in a quiet, careful way. But I only nodded, letting the moment stay where it was, unspoiled. The storm showed no sign of easing. The candles had burned lower, their wax pooling along the bases, casting long, soft shadows that stretched across the floor. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, though it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Mrs. Hale stood near the door, fingers brushing the doorknob. Her cardigan hung loosely now, one side slipping slightly from her shoulder, as though the weight of the night had finally tugged at her careful composure. "I should go," she said quietly, her voice calm but uncertain, like someone reciting a rule they didn't quite believe in. "It's late, and you know the rules." I nodded, though I didn't move to open the door for her. "I know." The air between us held a kind of pause, not the sharp, awkward kind, but one stretched thin with everything unsaid. The rain hissed against the windows, the building groaning softly with the wind. She looked at me then, really looked, not as a tenant, not as a neighbor, but with a searching softness that felt almost unfamiliar. Her hand stayed on the doorknob, though she didn't turn it. "You don't have to," I said at last, my voice quieter than I expected. "Not tonight." Her breath caught, barely audible, but enough that I saw her shoulders shift. She let her fingers slip from the knob and turned slowly, her eyes flicking once more toward the hallway, then back to me. "It's just a storm," she said, almost as if convincing herself. "Maybe," I replied, "but some storms aren't meant to be waited out alone." That drew the faintest trace of a smile from her, not a full one, just a small, fragile curve at the corner of her lips. She stepped closer, the soft rustle of her cardigan brushing against my arm as she moved. For a moment neither of us spoke. I held the blanket open slightly, a quiet offer rather than an invitation. She hesitated, then exhaled, a slow, careful breath that seemed to release something more than just tension. She sat beside me, her shoulder grazing mine. The shared warmth of the blanket settled over us, carrying the faint scent of rain from her hair and the softness of fabric against skin. "I shouldn't," she murmured, though it sounded less like a warning and more like a memory of one. "You're not doing anything wrong," I said, my voice barely above the whisper of the rain. Her eyes lowered, her hands folding loosely in her lap. Then, with a slow, uncertain motion, she leaned just enough for her head to rest against my shoulder. The weight of it was light, almost tentative, as though she might pull away any second. I didn't move. The clock ticked on. The storm kept its vigil outside. And in that small, quiet space, a line that had always been there blurred, not broken, just softened, gently, like candlelight at the edge of a shadow. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world outside rinsed clean, wet streets glinting like polished stone, the sky a soft wash of gold and gray. I woke to the quiet clatter of porcelain and the low hum of a kettle. For a moment, I thought I dreamed the night before, the candles, the rain, her head resting softly on my shoulder. But then I turned my head and saw her. Mrs. Hale stood in my small kitchen, hair loosely tied, a few strands curling at her neck. The cardigan she'd worn had slipped from her shoulders, folded now over the back of a chair. She moved with that same calm composure I'd come to know, but there was a gentleness to her gestures this morning, an ease that hadn't been there before. "Morning," I said, my voice still rough with sleep. She glanced over her shoulder, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You didn't have any tea, so I brought some from my place. Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," I said, sitting up, pulling the blanket aside. The room smelled faintly of rain-dampened air, mixed now with the earthy warmth of steeping tea leaves. She poured 2 cups and set one before me. The steam rose between us, catching the first strands of sunlight that spilled through the window. For a moment neither of us spoke. "About last night," she began, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I don't usually do that. I have these boundaries. Rules. They make things simple." I nodded, waiting. But, she continued, her voice quieter now, last night didn't feel complicated. It just felt human. And I can't quite bring myself to regret that. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, the heat soaking into my palms. I don't regret it either. Her eyes met mine, steady now, though there was still that flicker of vulnerability behind them, the part of her that had built those walls in the first place. You're younger, she said softly, almost to herself. You have your life ahead of you, and I've made peace with mine being quieter. Quieter isn't always better, I said. Sometimes it just means you've been waiting for something worth the noise. That drew a real smile from her, small, but warm, like the first hint of sun after a long rain. She sipped her tea, gaze drifting toward the window where the city was beginning to stir. Maybe the rule was never about the nights, she said at last. Maybe it was about not letting things get too close. Then maybe it's time for new rules, I replied. The words settled between us, not as a promise but as a possibility, a shared, unhurried understanding. No rushing, no declarations. Just the quiet, steady beginning of something neither of us had planned for but both, in some quiet way, wanted to see where it might go. She reached across the table then, her fingers brushing mine, a simple touch, light but sure. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like room, for whatever came next.